Michael, I'm taking a liberty here in assuming that not all the readers know who you are. If you give a short introduction of you, your background, and what it is you do.
Certainly, well, I think that's a very good assumption to make because probably no one knows who I am. My name is Michael Tipper, and I like to describe myself as a specialist in the areas of memory development, speed reading, mind mapping, accelerated learning, and creative thought. And I've just recently extended that to include personal productivity and effectiveness. And whilst that may sound like a lot of topics, they're all basically centered on understanding how the mind works and getting more from it. Now, I'm not a psychologist or a specialist or any trained medical specialist, but I'm merely someone who a few years ago felt that actually I'm struggling with a few things. The first thing it was memory. I thought I had a poor memory. And so I did some research, bought a memory course, learned how to remember more effectively. And since then, that's been sort of like a lifelong journey on seeing, okay, well, how can I use more of my mind? How can I get more from this thing between my ears? And in doing so, I got reasonably good and proficient at the various skills. And then I started sharing them with people and eventually got to the stage where that became my full-time occupation. So in terms of my professional background, I was a chartered engineer in the Royal Naval Submarine Service. I was a weapons officer and used those techniques and the skills to help me perform much better in my role had I not had those skills. And as a result of that, people were saying, well, how do you do that? How do you go through all that information quickly? How do you remember so much? And what are these silly drawings you're doing, which was, of course, mind mapping? And so I started sharing those with people. And then I discovered a passion for sharing these ideas. And with the amount of practice I had, I got reasonably good at it. And so therein started a second career. And since then, it's been about 13 years now since I left the Navy, I've been sharing these ideas with people all over the world. And I've personally spoke to over 100,000 people, designed programs to help people understand their mind that have been delivered to nearly 750,000 people. I've written a few books on the topic, and I've had my 15 minutes of fame. So that's it. And so now I walk my talk, I use the stuff, I do a variety of different activities, but fundamentally I'm helping people how to get more from their mind. So that's just a bit about myself.
Mm-hmm. So I heard in a previous interview as well that you prefer the word specialist over expert.
Oh, absolutely, yes. The reason for that is I'm constantly learning. I have a library of books that is ever expanding. Although having said that, now I'm on the iPad and Kindle. The bookshelves aren't expanding, but my ownership of published material on the topics is. I'm forever finding better ways of doing things. I'm forever finding better ways of teaching these ideas. And so I don't like calling myself an expert because I think that's presumptuous. I'm merely a enthusiastic specialist, I suppose, enthusiastic hobbyist, I suppose. It just happens that I get paid for doing what I do. So, no, I'm a long way from being an expert.
So from the moment that you thought you had a poor memory, you bought this memory course, that's a long way of becoming the person you are now. And I think you skipped a couple of steps. You say you're continuously learning.
Yes.
In a quick, of course, bit of a recap, how did that come about? Because I'm assuming that course didn't just flip the switch, or did it?
Well, it did actually flip the switch in one sense, because if you can imagine sitting there not knowing how to do anything, I'm not sure if you're aware of the various stages of learning. You have unconscious incompetence, which is where you don't know that you don't know. You have conscious incompetence, which is where you suddenly realize that you don't know. Then you have conscious competence, which is where you start doing something and can do it, but you have to think about it. And then you have unconscious competence, where you can do it without even think about it. It's automatic. Well, I was unconsciously incompetent, which meant I didn't know that I could actually use my mind and my brain and my memory more effectively. And so when I struggled with these ideas, thinking it was a problem with me, and then I bought this course, and all of a sudden I was opened up to the world of my imagination, of my creativity, of the power of association and through some amazingly simple but very powerful techniques, it was like a huge switch being the switch being made. All of a sudden I was going, oh my word, look at what is possible. And so it was the sudden dawning and realization of what was possible. And then, so maybe getting to the level where those skills became easy for me to apply and I became very good at them may have taken some time, but I suppose really in my mind I'd suddenly realized I could do it. And I think that was where that was my big light bulb moment.
In your keynote presentation in The Hague, in our lovely rainy country, the Netherlands.
Oh, were you at that one, or this is the one you've seen the video?
Online, yes.
Yes.
No, I would have loved to be there though. You mentioned a couple of things, and now I'm actually lost for words for what I was actually going to ask. Is the great concentration you get from reading it. So I'm just going to skip that one and get back to that later.
Okay.
Looking at current society, with our education system, the way internet's developing, you refer to your iPad and Kindle. What is the significance of reading, and in specific speed reading?
Well, the significance of reading will never go away because we are able to take in a lot of information that way. It is a great way of passing information from one person to another. These days, video is huge. I mean, YouTube, the number of videos put up every second is astounding. We take a lot of information through videos, but we'll always have the need to read. So that is the key thing. So reading is always very, very important. What has changed, I suppose, is that now we are in a short soundbite world, and people's levels of attention and levels of concentration are much, much lower, purely because we are bombarded with so much information on a daily basis. And so it's never been more important than to be able to read information far more effectively. But the thing about reading, it's not so much, a few years ago I would have said, yes, you need to read much faster so you can, and more effectively so you can get through what you need to. But I think there is a bigger skill these days, and the bigger skill is about being able to identify exactly what it is you're going to read and exactly what it is you're going to discard. And that's where the greater skill comes in. There are things that, the way the education system teaches us to read is actually a very ineffective and inefficient way, because it sets up in the reader a series of bad habits. It also creates an expectation of and sets limitations on the beliefs of what we can really do because of the way we're taught to read. So our brain, our eye can take in a lot of information very, very quickly. But the trouble is we are taught to read at a fraction of the pace that we can do. And so the skills of reading that we're left with just aren't up to the job of the amount of information that we have to deal with. So on top of being able to read more effectively, a more effective skill is actually knowing what it is you want to read, going to that information, reading more effectively, but also having the discipline not to get sidetracked by things that are interesting, that really aren't there to serve whatever we're trying to achieve in the moment.
You sort of already touched upon this, and I can guess at your answer. But is this speed reading, this faster reading, is this something that is an innate ability, or something that needs to be trained? Can it be trained?
The innate ability to, let me change that. The innate capacity to be able to read faster is something we all have. But if you can imagine, I'll use the analogy of you being able to walk. If you can imagine that you go to school at, say, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they teach you to be mobile, but what they've done is they've tied both your legs together and one hand to those legs, and you've got to sort of hop about, and that's all you know, and that is all you can do. You manage to move around quite slowly, quite ineffectively, but you can move across the playground with your legs tied together and one hand tied there, sort of hop around. If that's all you know, that's as fast as you think you can go. And it's the same with reading, is that the way you've been taught, the skills you've been given, are the equivalent of tying your legs together and tying your hands to your ankles. And you think that's the only way to read. You think that that's the reading speed that you're born with, and that's as fast as you'll be able to go. If you try and read faster, you think you won't be able to remember anything and that you won't be able to understand anything. That's because it's all you've known. But in actual fact, the brain and the eye process together can take in a tremendous amount of information very, very quickly. And the biggest challenge that people will have who are listening to this, who are thinking, yeah, I think I need to read faster because I've got more stuff to read and I've got to read a lot more. What will happen is that their belief that they won't be able to take it in, that they won't be able to read faster, will get in the way of them actually improving their skills because they think they've reached the maximum. And how could you possibly read any faster because I'm going as fast as I possibly can now? And that's the biggest challenge.
So you have this great analogy, which is actually quite a funny image of tying people up in the education system. How does the education system do this, and how could it be done better?
Well, the reason it happens, and this is because of, I suppose, no fault of the education system other than ignorance and not understanding how the eye and the brain read when we were first taught, or when reading was first taught all those hundreds of years ago. Where the education system is at fault now is that there is sufficient information out there, there is sufficient evidence, there are sufficient people like myself teaching this stuff that and prove it can work. I mean, my reading speed is in the region of anywhere between 750 and 2,000 words a minute, depending on what I'm reading and the purpose I'm reading it for. And the average reader reads between 250 and 300 words a minute. And so I can read at least twice as fast, probably 4 or 5 times as fast than most people. And so the information knowledge is out there. The trouble is, most teachers don't have those skills. And most teachers are as ignorant of it as the average person. And also those teachers will obviously, if someone says, oh, you can read 3 or 4 times as fast, the immediate thing is, okay, well, I won't understand what I'm reading, so I'm not going to teach my students that, because if I won't understand it, they won't understand it. So that's the challenge, you see. And I think that there are so many different theories about learning, about the best way of doing it. There are so many different ways of learning, and people learn in so many different ways as well, that there's a whole, it's just like diet. What is the best diet? There's all sorts of different ideas. It's the same with education and learning. And I think until, and you see, it doesn't hurt enough. The reading stuff doesn't hurt enough. The problem that is there doesn't hurt enough. If all of a sudden, I mean, for example, obesity in kids is now becoming a big problem. So there's a big drive on dealing with that. And unfortunately, I don't think the reading problem will ever be as big. And so it's just really for enlightened individuals to share with those around them and hope more people find it. And I hope at some point some school will pick up, or at least a teacher will pick up on the idea.
That's very interesting because I recognize a lot of what you were saying. You mentioned that you read between 700 and 2,000 words a minute.
Yeah.
I can see where you're going with that. Can you tell me a bit more about the relation between your speed of reading and how much you can comprehend and how much you can actually remember from what you are reading?
Very good question, and it's a question I'm asked a lot. Now, what we need to understand here is that reading and comprehending is different from reading and remembering. You see, when most people read, and they read a page of text, they get to the bottom and they say, I can't remember hardly any of it. Now, there are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is possibly because they're reading too slowly. As a result of reading too slowly, their mind tends to wander, and the mechanics of the eye go across the process of looking at the page, but because their mind has wandered, they've not actually been consciously involved, which is why they often get to the bottom and can't remember what they've read, because they weren't consciously involved in the process in the first place. That's the first reason why people can't remember. Now, if people actually have concentrated on what they've been reading, they've understood every word, the reason why they can't remember it is because they haven't memorized it. Because, you see, there is a mismatch between the expectation of what we do when we read and what we actually do. So that all we do when we read is that we use our eyes to cross the page to recognize and assimilate the characters that form the words, and to recognize those as words and the meaning of those words. That is all we do when we're taught to read. But most people expect to do that and be able to remember it, but they haven't actually done the step to remember it. Now, some stuff will stay in there residually, stuff that you're interested in, stuff that's outstanding, stuff that's funny, and some things will just generally be there. But if you want to remember all the key points, you've actually got to go through a process of memorizing those key points using one of the variety of tools that are available out there. So that's what the difference is. So just to summarize that again, is that the expectation to be able to read and remember is actually different from the process we go through. All we do is actually read and understand. If you want to read, understand, and remember, there's a step missing, and you have to actually go through the process of memorizing it.
Basically, people tend to mix up comprehension and memory.
No, absolutely. And in any good speed reading course, you'll find that people will say, there's a big slide about comprehension does not equal memory. And it's a mantra for the rest of the course. People say, I can't remember. No, comprehension does not equal memory. You've understood it. It doesn't necessarily mean you remember it. So, for example, here's the way to look at it. Is everyone listening to this right now, assuming that English is a language they're proficient in, will understand everything that you and I are talking about over the time that we have with this interview. However, they won't be able to remember and recall every single thing that we've said. And that's the difference. It's the same with reading.
Yeah. Side question. You were talking about this reading, seeing letters as words, sentences. I've read a couple of theories, and one of them struck a chord with me, because whenever I read a book, and there are names in that book, on the page I can identify the name, but if you ask me to spell out the name with the book closed, I have no idea how to do it.
Yep.
What is such a theory behind that?
Well, what it is, and I have the same challenge whenever I'm reading novels and there are names there. What happens is the brain likes to take shortcuts, and the brain likes to be lazy. So if you can't make out if you're reading to the point where you can't. Sorry, let me start again. What happens, this is basically saying what happened to myself, is that I will recognize the shape of the word as being a name without really making any sense of it, and then in my mind, as I'm going through, if I'm reading a novel and this character appears and the name is mentioned, I'll know who that is. But if you said to me later on, well, what was the name of that person? I'll think, oh, I don't know. Because I didn't get to that level of fidelity to be able to recall it. So all I've done, I've made a generalization that shape of letters and words, which I haven't taken the time to actually break down and work out what it is for me the label for this person's name. So whenever I see that shape and characters, I'll know who they're talking about. And that's as far as I've gone. And so for me, that's what I work out. Some other people, because this doesn't happen for everyone, some other people actually take the time and will look at it and sort of, okay, well, this is the word, I've got this now, and they can say that. For me, it's not that important. And that's what happens in my own particular circumstances.
So would you consider this seeing name or word as image a good thing, a bad thing, a neutral?
It depends on what your outcome is. If your outcome is to study the text and be able to sort of recount what's happened and describe in detail, then it's probably not a good thing. If actually all you want to do is get enjoyment from the book, and you understand who the character is by recognizing the letters that form the name, or it may be. I mean, I sometimes find this is that I maybe sometimes generalize what the name is. In actual fact, later on when I actually look at it, there might be a syllable or two in there or a few letters in there, and actually it's pronounced completely different to what I thought it might be. So if I'm just there to enjoy the story, then it doesn't really matter. So it all depends on what your outcome is for reading the book.
So when you talk about speed reading, would you recommend this to everyone? Would you say this has to be something that has to be done in schools, or only for specific individuals?
I would say, on a global perspective, I would say that the education system really... I once wrote a blog post that said that I felt it was criminal the way we're taught to read in schools because of the way it holds us back. To the extent that people could be reading 6, 7, 8, 9 times faster than they are right now and be able to take in far more information, do it far more effectively. So I felt it was criminal. So in my mind, I think that we need to go back to source and that we should educate our educators on understanding that reading as a process the way we teach it is underutilizing what we are truly capable of. And we need to break that cycle of people who don't do it, so therefore they teach other people how they learn to read. So we want to get some people in there who know how to do it, teach the next generation how to do it, so it almost becomes natural. I mean, these days, kids, they don't really need to be taught about how to use computers, they just find how to use it. Back 20, 30 years ago, people had to be taught how to use computers. And these days, we don't even think about it because kids are just naturally drawn to that. I think the same needs to happen with speed reading. So that's on the global perspective, if you want to solve the speed reading equivalent of world hunger. On an individual basis, those people who've been through an education system and they are standard readers, which means they're reading between 250, 350 words a minute, I would say to those people, look, if as part of your work or even your pleasure you need to read a lot of information, and if as part of that you find yourself struggling to get through a lot of that information, then there are ways that you can increase your reading speed, increase your reading effectiveness, and they're fairly easy techniques. It's not too difficult to do. However, recognize that in order for you to change this skill that you've had for X number of years, and that's probably sort of however old you are minus 5, that's probably the number of years you've been reading, you've got that skill, that's a habit. If you want to change that habit, that's going to require a little bit of effort, a little bit of frustration, and there will be a little bit of time where you'll think it's not working for you as you adjust to the higher rates of reading. So I would say to people, look, is there a need for you to read more effectively? Is there a need for you to read faster? And then, if so, understand that you can do it. It will require a bit of effort, but with a bit of investment, you could be saving yourself or doubling, trebling, quadrupling your reading speed, which means doubling, trebling, quadrupling the amount that you have to read. Or putting it another way, it means halving or cutting by a third or cutting by to a quarter the time it takes you to currently read the stuff you have to now.
Now, you mentioned that a lot of these skills, memorization, comprehension, reading, they're all sort of interconnected.
Yeah.
Is it possible and is it desirable to learn speed reading as a separate skill?
It will be taught as a separate skill, but if you're looking to take what are you going to do with the information? If you're just going to read for pleasure, and if you just want to read more effectively, then you can take I think speed reading is probably a bit of the wrong term. It should really be effective reading, because what most people have is, it's like riding a bike with one gear. They go out on a cycle ride with one gear. They've got to go up hills, up very steep hills, along flats, down very steep hills themselves, different terrain. On one gear, that's difficult. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have different gears to go up and down the different terrain of the road. It's the same with reading. People are given one gear and that's it. But actually reading is very, very different. If you're going to read a very complex report, you need to get just an overview of what's there. You'll read that very differently to the way you may study one of your favourite poems. And if you just want to savour every single word, you'll read it completely differently. There's a whole range of different reading speeds, different reading techniques in between. And so what I would suggest to people is, look, if you want to get more from your reading and do it far better, and the definition of better depends on what you're doing. So it could be reading and learning information. It could be reading and understanding. It could be reading and identifying and looking for problems. It could be reading and just savouring every syllable of a poem. Getting clear on what it is you're going to achieve, and then use the right set of skills, the right set of tools to do that. And so all we're talking about here is increasing the toolkit that you have at your disposal for handling information, and then giving you more options so that you can use the best tool at the right time.
That sounds good. And what would you suggest as a good place to start learning these skills?
Well, I think the key thing for me is that don't start with speed reading. The key thing for me is get very clear on what it is you want to read and why, and get into the discipline of filtering out what you don't need and focusing on what you do need. If you start there, then what will happen is you will start to cut down the volume of stuff that you do have to read. Because you see, with most I had a client from India contact me recently, or a potential client, and wanted me to do a speed reading course. And I wrote back and said, look, I don't actually think that's what you need, because if you learn to read faster, all you're going to do is get stressed and overwhelmed quicker. Because the key skill is the clarity on what it is you want to achieve, and then what information you need to achieve that, and what you want from that information. And when you do that, you can cut down to 10, 15, 20% of all the reading material that comes your way now, and all of a sudden the amount of reading drops off. When you've got that skill under your belt, then I suggest that, okay, now you're actually doing some proper reading on the stuff that you only definitely need to read. Now let's look at making that more effective and doubling or trebling the reading speed that you do. So many speed reading courses do it the other way around, where they teach you to read fast and then teach you to filter. I believe that you should understand how to filter first and then speed read, to the extent where actually you don't need to learn to speed read, just learn to filter it properly. And then when you've filtered it properly, use tools that will help you process it more effectively, and the one I recommend is mind mapping.
So, what is your favorite book of inspiration?
My favorite book of inspiration. Now, I'll answer this question in a number of ways. Probably the book that I read and have read the most is a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. It's a very short story. It's about a seagull who evolves through life and through the universe. And it's a story that touched my heart many years ago, that I found really very inspirational. And it's only a short story. You can read it in, I could read it in about 20 minutes. But an average reader could read it maybe an hour, hour and a half. But it's a very powerful story. And it's one that I've given the copies of this book away many, many times. So that's very much an emotional, spiritual sort of inspirational type book for myself. If we're starting looking at the concept of self-improvement and moving forward, the first book I ever read was a book called The Magic of Thinking Big, which helped me realize that it's by a guy called David Schwartz. It was written in the late 50s, I think it was. I was 16 when I read it, and it had a massive impact on me because it gave me some very, very simple ideas of how I could be more effective, how to improve my confidence. And so I think you always remember your first one, and that for me was the first one. And then over the years I've read many, many different books, and each have sort of given me different things at different times. And so a big one in terms of the general concept of success is called the Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And pretty much any book on success that you will read today has its roots in that particular book. And it is a very famous book. I think there have been, the copy I have, which is a good 12 years old, said over 7 million copies have been sold. I'm sure many more since then. And that in itself is a remarkable book for giving you the fundamentals of what it takes to be successful. So there's that. Now, if I bring up to date the sort of books that I'm reading now at the moment that I've had and are having a huge impact on the way I do things, are things like The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, which is all about understanding why we put things off, why things seem difficult. It's all about resistance, all about why we procrastinate. That, and he's done another book called Do the Work, which is another great book. And then there's another one called Take the Stairs by a guy called Rory. The name escapes me for a second. I'll come back to that. But that is a very, very powerful book as well. And so there's a variety of books. And what I found is those books have been very useful for me at different times. Those are the key ones. But as I go through life, different books appear at different times. The Take the Stairs by Rory Vaden, V-A-D-E-N. So I'm sorry there isn't a single book there, but those are the ones that sort of the long held ones from when I first started reading to sort of the ones I'm reading right now. And every so often a great book comes up from the top of my head. There's Start with Why by Simon Sinek. These are ones that are on my Kindle right now. That's a really good book. There's another one called it's just straight out of my it's just gone straight out of my mind. It'll come back to me in a second. I'll remember it before the end of the interview. So those are the books I'm reading at the moment.
So speaking of inspiration, I suddenly remembered my question now that you forgot some of your names.
Okay.
You were talking in your speech about that intoxicating moments of flipping that switch and you sort of learn, and you said, now if these beliefs that you have about not being able to remember something, not being able to read something, if that can be proven wrong, what else of your beliefs can be proven wrong?
Absolutely.
And would you say that that is sort of a realization, a dawning, if you will, that causes you to constantly seek out new knowledge and new skills?
It is. I think just to explain and expand that a little bit more, in my presentations I talk about memory, and a common belief is that people have a poor memory. In fact, I had that belief myself when I was very young. But I discovered that it wasn't that my memory was at fault, it's just that I didn't know how to use it. And so when I discovered that it was a lack of knowledge, it was an incomplete skill set rather than actual inability, then what that proved is that the belief I had was wrong. And so when I'm working with audiences, I will ask them the question about belief of memory. Most people believe they have a poor memory. I will teach them some stuff, and then at the end of the presentation, I'll have them recall it. And so I'll challenge the belief that they had. And the key thing for me is that if that belief that they had was wrong, there must be other beliefs that they have got in their life that are holding them back. And so I say, look, what if some of those are wrong as well? And that for me is key. And I think that our potential is incredible. But what we actually do falls far short of what we're capable of, because the beliefs that we have, and beliefs are incredible things. I mean, beliefs beliefs are just have incredible control of us, both positively and negative. And so I'm always striving to seek to challenge my beliefs and to look at them and see, okay, is this serving me or not? And if it isn't, then see if I can change it to another one that does serve me. And I found that helps me move forward.
So to all future speed readers, and I guess also memorizers and comprehenders, do you have a piece of golden advice?
Yes. The key piece of advice along the lines of achieving something, increasing a skill, whether that be speed reading or memory, is to get very, very clear on what that's going to look like when you've got there. And it's really very important to do that, because a generalization of, I'm going to improve my memory, well, I could say, well, just write everything down then. There you go, you've improved your memory, just got to read back what you've written down if you want to recall it. Is not the answer probably they were looking for. And so you have to know what it looks like, what it tastes like, what it smells like, what it feels like in your mind, so clear that you can taste it and smell it and feel it. And when you've got that in place, what tends to happen is that all of a sudden you will accelerate towards that, because the brain is very much a result-seeking, a goal-seeking mechanism. And whilst we express our goals in generalizations and in very vague terms, that's what we're going to get, generalizations and a vague life. But as soon as you get that clarity, then you are halfway there. So that's the first step of the golden piece of advice, if you like. The next step then is really quite simple. Do whatever it takes until you have achieved that goal that you've defined. And the key word there is the word until. Because you keep trying something, if it doesn't work, try something else. And keep going at it, keep going at it, keep going at it until you get there. And then when you've done that, then then you've achieved your goal. And that really is success. Define what you want, do whatever it takes within moral, legal, ethical boundaries, of course, until you get there. Now, what you'll find in doing that is that there are all sorts of rubbish will get in the way, challenges will come your way, your own beliefs will stop you. There's all sorts of things circumstances will change. There are all sorts of things will get in the way, and that's where the word until comes into it. If it really is something that you're passionate about and you want, then go for it. And believe me, is when you do that, all sorts of strange doors will open, opportunities will arise, but sometimes it's going to be hard work. Sometimes it's going to be blood, sweat and tears. And occasionally that's just the universe just testing you to see whether you really, really want it. And that's where the word until comes in. So that was probably a bit of a long answer, but that, I suppose, fundamentally is when I've applied that, and I'll be honest, I don't always apply that because I haven't always got what I've wanted to go, but when I have applied that, it really works. And what I see around me and the successful people I know, when they apply it, and many of them do on a regular basis, it really does work.
That sounds like a very practical piece of advice. I'll definitely try that.
Don't try.
You do it.
Don't try, only do, yeah. I think it's important to get most people, when they say, oh, I'll try, it's, although there's a sort of well-intentioned, yeah, that sounds good, I'll have a go at that. When you say the word try, you're almost giving yourself the excuse not to do it. It's the same way as if you're going to have a party at your house next weekend and you invite a whole load of people and you see one of them the day before and say, you're going to come to my party tomorrow. And they say, yeah, I'll try and be there. You know they won't be there. And so it's important not to use language like the word try. A very subtle thing, but it's a very powerful thing. Sorry to correct you there.
No, that's good. That's a bit of a Yoda piece of advice. What you just said there, using that type of language. In my studies, I come across a concept like language preceding thought.
Yes.
Do you think that's the case in certain?
I think it's the language part of our brain. It's generally led to. It's generally believed that it's part of the left part of our brain. It's in the cortex, the thinking part of our brain. When we think, actually, the thought process happens a long time after something has happened. And generally what happens is that the order of things, the order of processing of things starts off with a feeling first. So your reptilian brain will pretty much be processing a situation long before you have time to think about it and express your feelings about it or your thoughts about it in words. So your reptilian brain will respond first. Then what happens, you'll get the feeling, which comes from your mammalian brain, which is the next most evolved part of your brain. And finally, after a while, you'll suddenly start to say, oh, hang on, I don't feel right at the moment. So it's almost like the other way around, is that thoughts or feelings will generate thoughts. Now, thoughts can generate feelings, but the last thing that we ever do is that we express them in the form of words. Now, we can flip that round. We can use words to help program our mind to be certain ways, to generate certain beliefs, to give us confidence. So words can precede thoughts, but it is a two-way street. It does go both ways. Have I made sense there? I was rambling a bit.
Very much. No, that's very good. As a side note to the readers, the language preceding thought is basically based on a thought experiment of a language where you remove a word like justice.
Right.
So the question, does the people with that language still have the concept of justice?
Okay. That is getting quite deep, isn't it? I think that again, I'm just hypothesizing on the fly here. I think that there are certain things that fundamentally, without language, people will understand. Because remember, language has evolved after we've evolved as human beings. So we've evolved a language to express what we're feeling. And I think there are some basic concepts that don't need language to be able to understand. When you start talking about the concept of justice and some of those more not esoteric but more abstract type terms, then it might be that language is required to access an understanding and express an understanding of it.
As a side note, I was having an interview with someone else the other day, someone who speaks quite a few languages. And we were talking about the fact that in some languages there are words that don't exist in others.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Dutch you have a great example, leedvermaak, the pleasure at someone's suffering.
Okay.
Sounds very dramatic, but it's basically the reason you laugh when someone shits.
Sure.
And
there's a German word for that as well, isn't there?
Schadenfreude.
That's it, yes.
English tend to use as a word, but I guess it's a bit of an example of how, well, I guess the rich people still laugh when someone shits.
Yes.
Too sophisticated for such humor.
Mm.
Alright, so looking back over the interview, do you have any remarks on any specific topics, things you really want to get out there?
I think it's been a very good interview. You've asked some very searching questions, and hopefully I've been able to give you some information of value. I think fundamentally, I would suggest to people who are listening to this, who are looking to make improvements in their life, is that there's a lot of information out there, and you could spend a long time reading lots and lots of books and finding lots and lots of ways of doing things, lots and lots of better ways. And all I would suggest to people is, look, enjoy life. You are a perfect individual despite what you may think about yourself. Learn to love yourself and learn to respect the life that you have and enjoy it. And a lot of people read personal development books and sort of become a student of success and spend a lot of time reading lots and lots of books and never doing anything. If all you did was read Think and Grow Rich and applied it, you could have a fantastic, if you want to apply it to business or just your life generally, that's all you would need. So all I would suggest to people is that find some ideas, apply them, incorporate them into your life, and then move on and do something else. Don't just spend all your time reading and come up with a whole list of things at some point you'll actually do. So that's probably the last thing I would say. So as far as the remarks about the interview, I think that coming back to the original reason for you contacting me was about speed reading. It is a skill. It can be developed. Get very clear on what you want it for. Practice it, and then it'll be part of the way you do things. And it's a very straightforward process. Will require some effort, but often we have to take a step back and invest in ourselves and take some time out for us to be able to move forward.
That sounds like a very life-worthy strategy. Right. Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, and it's been lovely talking to you.
Well, then we hereby officially conclude the interview. Click. And I hope that the weather in the UK gets a lot better.
Well, I hope it doesn't, because we have nothing to talk about.